So what makes me cranky about Justice League? Henry Cavill's upper lip. Every time he's on screen, you basically end up doing that bit from Red Letter Media's review of the Star Wars prequel.
Oh my God! What's wrong with your face?
If you don't know what I'm talking about already, they had to digitally remove Henry Cavill's mustache since most of his scenes were reshoots, and he'd already grown it out for his part in the next Mission Impossible movie by the time that happened. Why they couldn't just shave it off and outfit him with a passable fake mustache, I don't know, but the millions of dollars they spent trying to CGI the thing away were utterly wasted on what will probably go down in history as one of the most embarrassingly bad bits of CGI in any movie ever. Which will probably make it the most memorable thing about this film other than its already abysmal Rotten Tomatoes score. And I'm sorry to say, it absolutely earns that score. But before I get into all the reasons why, including more terrible CGI, Disney hasn't sent me my check for the Thor review yet, so let me just say that yes, you can have fun with this movie. If you go in and somehow manage to enjoy this, I understand why. When you get down to it, it's a big dumb action movie, and unlike Batman v Superman or Suicide Squad, it's not a maudlin, depressing affair that makes you want to kill yourself by the end. And unlike Man of Steel, its heroes don't end up being a bigger menace than the villains they're combating. So there are things to enjoy here, including the sense of humor that Joss Whedon must have injected when he was doing the reshoots, because I laughed quite a few times, some of which were even because the movie wanted me to at the time. In the moments we get to see the characters we all love, the way we always wanted to see them, trafficking in the kinds of hopeful themes that make superheroes superheroic in the first place, you can almost forget how bad everything else is. But ultimately, that's what makes this so hard to watch. That utterly wasted potential, knowing we deserve better movies than this. Especially when we can look over at Marvel and see how well it can be done when the people making the movies take the time to build a version of the comic book world that celebrates everything people love about the characters and their stories, rather than tries to cynically deconstruct them. Arguably, the most infuriating part of Batman v Superman was seeing all that money up there on the screen being wasted as stories like the death of Superman were just pissed away forever because the guy running the show didn't care for the character and the studio making the movie was too desperate to cash in on the fat of the day to plan out a coherent universe. Just as the Avengers was the culmination of Marvel's success and planning, Justice League is now the culmination of all of DC's failures. Only this time you don't even see the money up on the screen because the effects are so terrible that it looks like a Sci-Fi Channel made-for-TV movie half the time. It's actually impressive how unbelievably fake everything looks, especially the aforementioned CGI shave job. You might as well have had the guys that splice Conan O'Brien's mouth onto pictures of other actors come in and do that for Henry Cavill, since it probably would have been just about as convincing for like a tenth of the cost. At the very least, a picture of Cavill's face would fit right in with how stiff and uncomfortable the rest of the cast looks most of the time. And it hasn't been this obvious a bunch of people were standing around surrounded by green screens since the Star Wars prequels. Perhaps none more so than poor Ben Affleck. He recently said he's looking to exit the role gracefully, and boy does it look like it here. Maybe he was just going for stoic Bruce Wayne? But the expression on his face for the lion's share of his screen time seemed to be screaming, "Somebody please God, get me out of this!" Jason Momoa certainly had a good time, though, even if his character's particular power set is rarely showcased owing to the fact that most of the movie takes place far away from any kind of water. Not that we really needed any more scenes of people trying to hold their breath as inconspicuously as possible. And if you were hoping to get a good look at the DCEU's version of Atlantis, don't bother holding yours. They really don't do much with Aquaman's home turf. As for the rest of the league, Ezra Miller's Flash is the source of most of the comedy stuff, but unfortunately I have Grant Gustin on the CW to compare him with, and Gustin is just better at flashing in every way, especially in the critical area of running really fast. Every time they stop to show Miller trying to move at top speed, he flails about so wildly you'd expect him to faceplant as soon as they turned off the slow motion effect. As you might expect, based on my complaints about the CGI, Cyborg still looks as distractingly goofy as he does in the trailers, so whatever Ray Fisher was trying to do with that character ultimately doesn't matter much. Fortunately, Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman continues to shine, and she's the only character whose arc feels anything close to well executed, but even that's incredibly rushed. I know they cut this down to 2 hours, but they left in too many different ideas and action sequences to make it fit comfortably. So the pacing's all over the place, nothing has time to breathe or resonate, especially since a good third of the movie is still Snyder's slow motion ramping, which eats up screen time like nobody's business. And when it isn't in slow motion, the action is very difficult to follow because it's a mess. It's framed, edited, and paced poorly, there's distractingly bad CGI everywhere, there's rarely a good sense of where characters are relative to other characters, probably because everything is being done in front of a green screen. And we never get a good idea of how durable our characters actually are, so it's hard to feel like they're ever really in danger. Even as much as Batman gets tossed around, the worst he suffers is a dislocated shoulder. So I'm not sure why he couldn't just take on Steppenwolf himself instead of basically begging the other heroes to help him in a way that every modern incarnation of Batman I've ever seen absolutely would never do. Speaking of the villain, Steppenwolf ranks right up there with Ronan, the Dark Elves, and Fant Four Sticks Doctor Doom for terrible, generally unthreatening, one-note, boring CGI effect villains with a penchant for monologuing about how badass they are supposed to be. Oh, and he has the endless supply of disposable henchmen to waste on our heroes, which I just got done lambasting in the Thor Ragnarok review as being an incredibly tired trope now. At least we get to hear the Danny Elfman Batman theme again, since he did the score, which thankfully saved us from another 2 hours of thundering drums. Then again, there isn't much in the way of memorable music outside of that, which is kind of funny since one of the few areas in which the DCU has been better than the MCU was in crafting really memorable musical motifs for its heroes. Like it or hate it, nobody's going to forget Wonder Woman's electric cello riff after all. In the end, Justice League feels like the superhero team-up movie we would have gotten if they had tried it back in the 90s, when comic book movies were still largely seen as silly kid stuff. You know, they would have half-heartedly rushed something out the door for a quick cash grab in order to keep the rights of the franchise, dragged a few big-name actors in to play roles they considered beneath them for a big check, then filmed them standing around bored in front of green screens. The action sequences would have been a goofy mess, straining the lengths of what early CGI could do, and all of it would have been sprinkled with obvious product placement so that they could pay for the whole thing with someone else's money. And maybe back then, before we had an example of how good it could be, the thrill of seeing these characters together that way would have been enough. But we've all seen better now. Repeatedly. We know that the characters can all come together in a satisfying way that feels natural, rather than having to stand conspicuously in line like they're posing for a poster shot to prove that they're in the same space. We can have action sequences with a half a dozen superheroes that move fluidly from one to another, demonstrating their unique powers and linking them together in real time. We can be made to feel a genuine connection with them and mourn the death of one and see his sacrifice pull others together. A barely passing grade just isn't good enough anymore. And these characters we all love so much deserve better movies. So to wrap this up, Justice League is a mess, and unless you really want to see a big dumb action movie with people wearing familiar costumes, just wait to watch it on your HD TV of choice. If you really want to see it in the theater, save your money and hit a matinee. I wish I could say otherwise, but frankly, I don't think it ever had a chance to be a good movie worth recommending. Not because I didn't want it to be, but because it's built on an incredibly flimsy foundation. The DCEU was a Jenga tower ready to fall over, and then they just dropped this giant new block on top of it, and it's no wonder it just collapses in on itself. Besides being rushed and ripped up and rebuilt a couple of times, the heart and soul of this film's story rests on the notion that the DCEU Superman was indeed a beacon of hope and stability for our world. So much so that the Batman who was viciously trying to murder him in the last movie desperately wants him back, and the Wonder Woman who met him for all of 5 minutes talks about him like they were the best of friends. Of all the things in the film, that is the biggest joke. That the whole world is falling apart because Metropolis-leveling Superman is gone. At least it does end with a glimmer of hope, though. By the time the credits roll, these heroes are at least where they should have been from when this all started, so maybe they can soft reboot and start again from here or something. Oh, and another thing Joss Whedon seemed to have brought with him from Marvel, along with a sense of humor, are post-credit sequences. So you do want to watch to the very end for an incredibly bad pun that made me want to give the screen both middle fingers. That's what I thought about Justice League anyway. Feel free to flame away in the comments below. And while I don't pretend to be a beacon of hope for humanity, if you like the video, please hit that like button and subscribe for more reviews.